Chapter 5. Marian whirled around just in time to see a longish snake slithering out from behind a door. He was dressed in a smart brown cap and matching cloak and stared at her with sharp, beady eyes as he made his way to the throne. Then he slid up to the side and wrapped his body around the chair's arm. "Well, well," Prince John said, looking scoldingly at the snake. "Sir Hiss, it's about time you showed up. I've been here for practically hours, greeting our esteemed guest of all by myself. What have you been up to anyway? That's so important you couldn't be on time." Sir Hiss gave a respectful bow to the prince, though he looked a little annoyed. "Oh, just running the kingdom," he muttered. "Nothing to trouble your majesty." Prince John slapped him on the back of the neck. "Well, I suppose you're here now, and just in time to meet our lovely guests. This is Maid Marian. She's my brother's niece, God rest his soul, just back from Paris." Sir Hiss's eyes rested on Marian for a moment, taking her in. Then he smiled slowly, revealing gaped teeth. "Very nice to meet you, madame," he said smoothly, "and I apologize for my tardiness and interruption. Do go on. Tell us what you were about to say." "She was talking about taxes," Prince John interrupted. "She's saying the animals are being taxed too much." He frowned, scratching his head. "That's not right, is it, Hiss?" "Of course not, your majesty," Sir Hiss assured him, flicking his tongue. "As always, your brilliant tax plan is carefully calculated and exactly what it needs to be. But you know how those animals do love to complain," he added in the prince's ear, though loudly enough that Marian could still hear him. "They're not complaining," she broke in before she could stop herself. "They're starving. They have no money for food." "Then perhaps they should get jobs," Sir Hiss said smoothly, not missing a beat. "Like his majesty here. He works so hard for his kingdom." "I do," Prince John agreed with a grin. "I work hard all the time. Well, perhaps besides during my morning nap, of course, and my afternoon snooze. Then I do have an early bedtime, I suppose. But besides that," he clapped his paws together, "I work all the time." "It sure sounds like it," Marian muttered, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. "Look, Lady Marian, clearly you have a kind heart," Sir Hiss said, slithering close to her. She felt herself involuntarily back away to add distance between them. There was just something about the snake that seemed slimy. "And it's so good of you to worry about His Majesty's subjects. But please understand, we're trying to survive as a country under our recent tragedy. We are all making sacrifices, aren't we, Your Majesty?" Prince John was staring down at his paws, which were covered in jeweled rings. "Yes, of course," he mumbled. "We must all make sacrifices." He removed one of the rings, then replaced it with another, even bigger one from the stack of jewelry sitting on a table by his throne. "Besides, our citizens are happy to do it," Sir Hiss added quickly, before Marian could remark on this, "for they love their new monarch so very much." Prince John looked up with a goofy grin. "I am very, very beloved, aren't I, Sir Hiss?" "They sing of you in the streets, sire," Sir Hiss agreed, then smiled smugly at Marian. She resisted the sudden urge to pop him in the nose. She wasn't normally a violent fox, but he was pushing her to the edge. Where had he come from? How had he wormed his way into the throne room and into Prince John's greedy heart? If Richard had been there, he'd have thrown the snake out quicker than you could say flattery and false words. But Richard wasn't there, and he never would be again. "You know," Prince John exclaimed suddenly, "we should celebrate your arrival. After all, you are family, like you said. Maybe we could throw a ball in your honor to welcome you home." He scratched his chin. "Or maybe a feast. Mummy always did like to throw feasts when she had guests visiting the castle." "Oh no," Marian shook her head, horrified at the idea. Was he joking? A ball? when their king had just been murdered? A feast? When animals were starving in the streets? I mean, it's very kind of you to offer, she amended hastily, but I don't need a ball or a feast, thank you. Well, then what about a tournament? Prince John barreled on, clearly not getting the point. An archery tournament with a lovely prize. That's always popular with the nobles. Maybe you'd even be willing to give the winner a kiss. He wagged his eyebrows at Marian, and she fought back a cringe. Please, this is really not necessary, she protested. I don't need anything special. In truth, I'd just like to be put to work. That's the reason I'm home, you know. Your brother invited me to serve on the King's Council, and I'd very much like to still do so, under your rule. I know I'm young, but I've studied politics in school. I know I could be of value to the conversation. Prince John glanced at Sir Hiss. His mouth dipped into a frown. What is she talking about? He demanded. What council? Who has a council? The snake rolled his beady eyes. I'm sure I don't know, he said haughtily. But she is being very rude. Why, you're trying to offer her a lovely celebration in her honor, and she's demanding some sort of job, he sniffed. A job that doesn't exist. Sir Hiss flicked his tongue at Marian, and she felt a bit of spittle land on her snout. Disgusted, she brushed it off and glared at the snake. Prince John shook his head. Indeed, he muttered. Council! I've never heard of such a thing. Marian stared at him, astounded. Of course you have, she protested. Your own mother was a member of the council before she died, and you yourself were on your brother's council before the war. She didn't mention the fact that John had barely shown up for any meetings, but he had to have known it existed. Was he just pretending, or had he truly forgotten? None of this was making sense. I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about, Prince John said sulkily, and I don't appreciate your bringing up Mummy when I'm already sad. He stuck his thumb back in his mouth and slumped in his throne, looking very grumpy. Sir Hiss gave him a sympathetic look and patted him on the arm with his tail. It's all right, Your Majesty, he said. I'm all the counsel you need. Sir Hiss turned back to Marian with a satisfied smile. Now, if that's all settled, I'm sure you're very tired from your long journey and would appreciate a good rest. Without waiting for her to reply, he tapped his tail against a small bell, alerting the two guards standing at the entrance to the room. Joffrey, Gerald, will you please show our special guest to her chambers? Yes, sir, said the rhino to the left, Joffrey, as the rhino to the right, Gerald, opened the door and beckoned for Marian to follow. She shot one last look at Prince John, who was still slumped sulkingly in his chair, sucking his thumb and refusing to meet her eyes. She sighed deeply, then started towards the exit. She'd almost reached it when Sir Hiss addressed his guards again. One more thing, the snake declared. Once you have escorted the lady to her chambers, please stand guard outside her door. Wait, what? Marian shot a look at the snake. That's really not necessary, she assured him. I'll be fine. I won't need a guard. Sir Hiss opened his mouth as if in shock. Of course you do. You are a noble lady of the court, which means we must offer you the highest level of protection against anyone who might wish you harm. After all, it's dangerous out there, he added with a small smirk. I mean, look at what happened to your dear uncle. He thought he was safe too, until he wasn't. Marian frowned. She could tell the snake was enjoying this, and that his posting a guard had little to do with her protection. More likely, it was a way for the snake to keep an eye on those Newcastle guests, make sure she played by his rules. But at the moment, there was nothing she could do about it, so instead she nodded to the guards before heading towards the exit. Just as she reached the door, she turned to get one last look at the slithering snake. I'm watching you, she thought, narrowing her eyes at Hiss. I know you're up to something, and one way or another, I'm going to find out what it is.